I think we all have problems with expectations. A lot of times when something isn't what we expect it to be, it's cause for anger. There are tons of games that weren't what people expected, whether it be on purpose or on accident, and it can be a big deal for a lot of people. And I can't completely blame them. After all, that's what hype culture does. However, what about the opposite? When you see something that you expect to be not that special, a cash grab, hell, even bad, but then it ends up blowing your mind. For me, this doesn't happen too often. I tend to keep my expectations incredibly low for games, basically at zero. Meaning I tend to not expect anything so that when I play it, I won't be disappointed. Though that also can damper what could be great surprises, and even then, I can still be a slave to expectations. When I saw the trailer for Pikmin 4, I expected a Pikmin experience that wouldn't be much of an evolution. But when I played it, it was one of the greatest games I've ever played. When I saw Sonic Superstars, I was pretty optimistic it'd be a safe but fun experience, and it ended up disappointing me really hard. And when I saw the first trailer for Fire Emblem Engage, I expected a safe, dull, nothing special game that barely contributed to its series. I knew I'd get it at launch, I mean it's still one of my favorite game series ever, but I didn't really expect to care about it when I played it. And hell, after the first trailer, I didn't look at any of the trailers after it. However, upon playing it, not only was I pleasantly surprised, but I found what might be my favorite Fire Emblem game ever made. Now, this is a statement that I've actually made before, both during the Big Boy Gamer Awards and during my Binding Blade video. And to say it lightly, people noticed. I made jokes about how Fire Emblem fans hate Fire Emblem as a whole, and that might be the most obvious with Engage. I've spoken to a lot of people, at least 4 of them, and most have agreed that Engage is the worst Fire Emblem game in years, maybe ever, that the story sucks, and that none of the game is worth experiencing, that it's an ugly, fan-servicey mess of a game that doesn't even come close to what came before it. And as sad as I am to say it, like most Fire Emblem fans, they're all wrong. Now, I won't pretend that this game doesn't have its caveats, its obvious flaws, and we will for sure dig into those, but when I hear a lot of the hate, I kinda have to wonder if we even played the same game, or at least I wonder what exactly you're playing this game for. Now, a lot of the hate this game garners is directly from the comparisons to the game that came before it. And while I'll get deeper into that, do I think that this game fails as a successor to Three Houses? No, because for one, it's not a successor to it. And for two, most people comparing it in this way have usually only played Three Houses, and if you're lucky, one other Fire Emblem game. And this game is a culmination of everything that came before it, in both mechanics and map design. So it can be harder to appreciate if you aren't familiar with the series as much as I am. But if you are, this game is really something special, as its celebratory aspects aren't just in the fan service, but in so much more. I'm not saying that if you are a hardcore Fire Emblem fan, you'll love this game, but you'll notice a lot of the people who do praise it as much as I do are. But despite my need to suck this game's dick, I'll at least be somewhat fair and go over what tends to be unanimously agreed on as bad, or at least unappealing about the game. So let's get into it. Let's get into what makes Fire Emblem Engage bad to so many, and then we'll get into why it's incredible to the most important player base. Me. So let's get into the most surface level issue people have, the visuals. Now, if you've never played a Fire Emblem game and aren't familiar with it, there's really no issue. In fact, the game doesn't look half bad. However, if you are a fan, it's pretty noticeable, as there's an insane focus on anime aesthetics and out there character design. Now, Fire Emblem has always had an anime art style from the beginning. It's become a lot stronger in recent outings, but even the games people like to pretend don't have an anime art style very much do have one. No matter which game you're playing, it's anime chess. However, it's been debated how much the series should lean into that. For a while, mainly the GBA era to the end of the DS era, it was a fusion of anime aesthetics along with more European designs of the worlds and characters. A mix of both. Then Awakening comes out and leans a lot more into that modern anime style. Then Fates leans even harder, to the point where people, mainly the Western fans, start to become uncool with it. Then Echoes turns a bit away from that, and more into the European while not completely dropping what Awakening had. Then Three Houses. Still the same as the 3DS era, but with the outfits especially being a bit more tame, at least most of the time. So we all wait for what comes next. And Engage chooses to swing all the way into the anime side, with zany characters, tons of saturated colors, and a style that looks straight out of Genshin Impact. This is a big hang-up for people, as it goes to extremes in character designs that Fire Emblem never really went to. It basically completely drops the European aesthetic for most of the cast and just goes nuts. And while I get it, I really do, and I would personally prefer if the art style wasn't this extreme, I don't mind it. Hear me out. This game is cheesy, it's bombastic, and it's pretty silly. It's a celebration game whose storytelling is unsettled subtle and doesn't take itself seriously most of the time. And in that context, I think this art style is fine. Am I a fan of all of the designs? No. I'm not big for fanservice-y designs, so Ivy's is just a bit too much for me. Hortensia I don't completely hate, but she does look like a clown. Zephyia looks fucking ridiculous. Pandreo is a weird mess of dull and gaudy, and despite being a character people tend to like the design of, I think Yunaka looks atrocious. However, I think this art style also brought in some pretty neat designs too. I love Diamant. I'm always a fan of characters that wear their countries on their armor, and hell, I'd say all the royals nail that, even if I'm not a fan of Ivy's outfit personally. Mavier nails a look of intimidation with his massive size and armor. Rosato's great, taking advantage of the more wild character design for a character who specifically wants to look that way. He doesn't have weirdly colorful hair just for a design that draws your attention, he has it because it makes sense for his character, and he wants to look that way. And while we're on the subject of funny hair, Allier, this game's Lord and Avatar, I like their designs a lot. Yeah, they're silly looking, but not only does that actually have plot relevance, it works in a way that by the end, I can't really imagine them looking different. Not to mention, the game overall looks really good. It's not insanely beautiful, after all it's on a limiting system, but its visuals are still great to look at. The characters move fluidly in battle, critical hit animations look fantastic, and the game is filled to the brim with fully animated cutscenes. Almost every chapter has one, and they look great. The big super moves that engaging with an emblem gives you are fantastic. Just normal fights have small animations, like characters swiping arrows away. It's a very, very pretty game. Even if you don't like the art style, outside of that, I'd argue this is the best 3D Fire Emblem game from a graphics perspective. The only one that comes close for me is Echoes, and that's mostly for its art style, which as I said, outside of, this game looks better. So yes, while I understand the art style comparisons, I can't agree with people saying the game doesn't look great. It does, just maybe not in a way people wanted it to. But come on, we all know the real issue people have. People hate this game, despise it, because it has the worst story ever put into a video game. It's so bad, it's so boring, it's badly written. There isn't a single story in Fire Emblem that even compares to how bad this one is. And to that I say, what series do you think this is? You'd think by how much disdain this game's story gets, that Fire Emblem has always had incredible storytelling, and that these games should always be played for story. And if a Fire Emblem game has a bad story, it's a bad Fire Emblem game. That's a fucking lie. There are like 5 games in this series that I would say have good stories. The rest are either middling or straight garbage. Not only that, but most of the stories aren't even that deep. It just tends to be good versus evil. Good guy with sword fights bad guy with dragon. Even the games actually about war tend to have clear good guys fighting a clearly evil country. That's not complex, that's not gray. Sure, characters from the evil side can be deeply written, but there's rarely an actual reason for them to be on the evil side. The only games that really break that cycle for me are Part 1 of Genealogy of the Holy War and some of Three Houses, but that is literally it. Quick addendum, also some parts of Radiant Dawn, but I would also say that it's still pretty black and white, as Micaiah even acknowledges that they're basically on the objectively evil side. I'm not saying that Fire Emblem can't or shouldn't have great stories, even though simpler stories like Path of Radiance are still pretty great. It's just that I don't really play these games for the story. I have always played them for gameplay, and I don't really understand hating a game like this because of a bad story when that's never been something the series consistently touted. And even then, this story isn't even that bad. It's not good by any means, but I'd still say it's better than games like Fates or Awakening. What this game's story tends to be is a simple good versus evil story with over-the-top moments that doesn't take itself seriously, and for the most part, it succeeds. It's at its best when it's doing cheesy stuff with these cheesy characters and Saturday morning cartoon villain. When it fails, however, it does fail pretty hard. Like I said, when it's silly and knows it, it's great. Allier becoming an emblem, the loss of the rings, anytime Sombron is out and chewing the scenery, all of that works because it feels like the game knows what it is. However, there are other times where it feels like it wants to be more, and at those points, it fails. A game like this should be very fast paced, and while most of the time this game is, there are plenty of points where it just decides that it needs way too many words. Take early on. We've learned that Allier has no memories, and then get thrusted into attack where these zombies are attacking the castle and Allier's mom dies. Now let's compare this to a scene in a Fire Emblem game with a much worse story. Fates. When Corrin's mom dies, she says one sentence, and Corrin screams in agony before everything goes to shit. Here, Allier's mom gives him a long diatribe about his mission that takes an eternity to the point where when I first saw it, I actually expected that she wasn't gonna die until she finally did. That's this game's biggest issue. It really wants to be silly and fun, but then it wants to be serious, and its way of doing so is vomiting way too much dialogue that didn't need to be there. It happens when Lumera dies, it happens when Alier dies, it happens when Lumera dies again for some reason, and it happens before each hound dies. Also, on that topic, fuck the hounds. These guys suck. I think they'd be fine if they were like Team Rocket, but I feel like the game actually wants me to be intimidated when they show up and then give a shit when I hear their backstories. I don't understand how, because during the second half of the game, they show up in almost every chapter and lose pathetically in all of them, even chapters after they die. What's worse is that they actively make the villains seem stupid. You see, this game's plot revolves around the Emblem rings, and they give whoever uses them insane power based on the character who inhabits them. And the game does a great job showing just how important they are. As if any character on your side or the other gets one, they have incredible advantages. And the game really starts building that whoever has more rings is going to win the fight. So once you get half, you barge into the enemy castle, only for the main villain Sombron to appear, steal them all, and send you running. This is a fantastic scene, which also instills a feeling of you being vulnerable for the first time in well over 8 chapters or so. But then the way you get the rings back is that a hound will take it without asking, get their asses handed to them, and then drop the ring. Every time these idiots show up, it is to give you a free ring, and then 2 scenes later be scolded by Sombron. And it makes me wonder, why hasn't Sombron just murked these guys yet? Not only that, but the game really wants you to care about them by the end because they were just sad people looking for family. But their backstories are as generic as they come, and you only get them when one is about to die. And when you look at that, when the last 2 hounds die, it's a massive barrage of pointless dialogue. My favorite thing that this game does, the only one of these guys I can say is a decently written character outside of the DLC, is Mavier. And look at that, he's the only one who changes sides. So the reason he was the most intriguing is because you didn't have to kill him. And it sucks that they make Sombron look so stupid because he's the opposite in terms of effectiveness. If you want to make a villain pathetic, have them lose all the time. But if you want to make them intimidating, have them ruin you every time they show up. For as simple as Sombron is as a villain, he works because you never actually fight him until the final chapter. When he first shows up, he immediately kills that stage's boss, steals your rings and your way of resetting turns, and forces you to run. When you encounter him again, he once again takes your shit, murders you, and then steals the wish the emblems grant every 1,000 years. Then right before the final boss, he almost successfully seals you in fucking purgatory. Sombron works because every time you see him, something goes horribly wrong. The hounds fail because whenever you see them, nothing but good things happen for the protagonist. And again, this wouldn't be a problem if the game had less words and they could just be Saturday morning cartoon villains. That's why this game's story isn't very good in my eyes, because when it doesn't take itself seriously and just lets loose, it's a lot of fun, but it tends to want to think it's more than that when it really isn't and never had to be. What I can compliment wholeheartedly though is the characters who aren't the Hound. I've already mentioned Sombron, but on the good side, I really gel with the main royals and Alier. They've got great chemistry, and it feels like their relationship goes from reverent strangers to trusted allies by the end. And it makes the ending where Alier has to let go of the emblems while embracing the real people who've helped him stronger. Hell, Alier is done really well. I mean that completely unironically. He takes a pretty unique role as a lord, as instead of being a commoner who has to rise up into high places or a royal who's already leading, he's a mix. Alier in the games world is a big deal. He's basically Jesus, the next in line to watch over literally all of his continent. Yet not only can he not remember anything, he doesn't really want to be that. His first instinct when seeing enemies is to run, and he's mortified of the corrupted, the game's main enemies. However, as he meets new people and gets more rings, that cowardice turns into overconfidence, which leads him back to where he started, afraid and unsure of himself. But this all leads to him growing to the point where he cares about those around him so much that not only does he not back down when losing the rings again, he dies protecting other people and is willing to revive as a zombie just to fight one more battle. It's not only a cool arc, but a legitimately believable one, as Alier has to grow to deserve his station in the respect of others. It's also told very naturally, not just from his perspective, as even the emblems go from not being sure if he's the hero they need to using their one-time revival on him, finally giving him the status of Fire Emblem protagonist with blue hair. The characters and supports are also pretty good. I don't love all of them, and quite a few of them lean into their character traits a little too much, but there's plenty I love. Potentially shocking though, once again, not Yunaka. I find her gimmick of trying to hide her past while telling everyone about her past all the time, every day, really annoying. The characters like Ivy have supports that range from really funny to honestly pretty depressing. Diamant explores how his society has kind of put him in a position he's not ready for. Rosato's just a chill dude who helps others improve themselves. Seedal is incredibly entertaining. Mavier is great, as despite being part of the Hounds, he's actually a character I gave a shit about. There's plenty of good stuff here. I recommend looking into some of the supports if you found the game's main story lacking, because with most Fire Emblem games, the best stuff is here. The story leaves me conflicted. As well, yes, there is a lot of bad stuff, there's also a lot that I think it does really well. And overall, it's at least a lot of fun. I'm not saying it's awful, and upon replaying it, it's definitely not as bad as I remember, but goddamn, it needs less words. So if you cut like 50% of the dialogue, I think we'd be good. Also, I'm not going to comment on the fact that party members take a back seat after joining and only talking supports. That's literally every Fire Emblem game besides Three Houses. I didn't notice it at all. I'd also be remiss to not mention that this is the first Fire Emblem game in a long time to actually have good gameplay and story cohesion, as in what happens in the story and what the story is about affects the actual gameplay, which means now I can finally talk about what this video is actually here to praise. In all honesty, the graphics don't matter to me. The story's cutscenes I tend to skip, but the reason this game is so fucking good is because of that gameplay. Forget that weird, less than attractive outer shell. The real good stuff here is that rich, gooey center, just like me.
That's fucking gross, dude.
What? Fire Emblem Engage's gameplay is absolutely insane. It is such an unbelievable triumph that I don't even think I'm going to be able to cover every single inch of it, but god damn it will I try. This game's gameplay is a refinement of everything that came before it. It takes little things from each installment, refines them, and adds new mechanics on top of it. First off is its movement. Movement has been drastically reworked, so that instead of the best units moving 12 spaces and the worst moving 5 or 6, the lowest moving characters will still get around 5, but the best will only get around 6 or 7. This changes the way maps are designed completely, as now it's possible for every unit to get around without being outpaced by horseback units, while still allowing those with mounts to get to places faster and lead the front lines. The maps in this game take advantage of this by constantly encouraging you to spread out your units, to dare to extend farther and to take more risks, as there's treasure and items that you need to rush to, and that treasure tends to be pretty spread out. Not only that, but there are points where the game will basically spread your units out for you, whether it be from starting positions or pushing you to take different lanes with each unit. What also helps is this game's more compact map design. In a game like Binding Blade or Genealogy, those huge maps can lead to more turtling tactics, as wide spaces lead to simpler enemy formations. Here, because of the smaller maps, the game has more variety in what it wants you to do. It creates multiple ways to the end, with multiple stops in between to keep you moving without wanting to turtle. Not only that, but the game strictly punishes turtling with the way combat is changed for the better, as this game introduces breaking. This game brings back the weapon triangle, which most games had but Three Houses removed. However, here, hitting an enemy with weapon advantage will break them, making them drop their weapon for one attack. This changes a lot, because now hitting an enemy that could counter you is now riskless with advantage, and if you don't kill them, it's also a riskless follow-up. This creates more aggressive gameplay, as you want to break enemies in order to push further forward. But what makes break work is that enemies can do it to you too, and it can be quite scary. If you're broken, that's free damage for the enemy, and certain enemies can break you without even attacking, leaving you very vulnerable to large groups of enemies if you didn't think about who's closest to them, which the game will always let you know if you are close, by the way. I believe that other games have done this, but it's especially useful here because all of this together turns Engage into one of the most player phase focused games in the series. Enemies are in large groups and unique formations, and if you're unprepared, you can get broken, take heavy damage, or get taken out completely. But if you focus on spreading units out to take down a lot of enemies before each of them can attack next turn, you'll get punished a lot less on enemy phase. This encourages aggressive player turns and shorter enemy turns. What this also creates is a lot more replayability. I like games like Awakening and Path of Radiance, but I tend to drop them halfway through when it becomes a game of sitting and tanking every single map. But here, every run through of a map feels different, whether it be from different units or different customization options. It challenges you to play smarter in exchange for safer turns, which is exactly how I like my Fire Emblem. On the topic of customization, I think Fire Emblem lately has been very creative with how it lets you customize every unit, which Three Houses focused on the most, having every unit unit on your team be a growth-focused unit that you can build however you want. Compared to that, Engage's offerings can seem a lot more limited, but in all honesty, it might be the most open any Fire Emblem game has been when it comes to class choice. See, in Three Houses, while yes, options are diverse, once you start down a path, you won't be swerving from it very often, if at all. Here, you feel encouraged to try out whatever you want, as you're never locked into anything specific. Yes, certain units do better in certain areas, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't experiment based on weapons and emblems. Look at Anna, she starts out as an axe user, but because of her growth, she's actually a fantastic mage. Or look at my Allier, I originally went Wolf Rider until I got the Corrin Emblem ring, to which I then chose his personal class, as different classes interact with emblems differently, with the Divine Dragon class having the best synergy with Corrin. This is because each class has a passive ability, whether it be to have an assist attack that does light damage, do more damage with stuff like magic, or sync with emblems differently. The abilities are small, but very much matter, especially once the game's bread and butter comes into play, emblems. It's hard to not mention emblems because they affect all other forms of gameplay. The way your class might work, buffing your class, your overall battle strategy, these things matter a lot, which is why when you lose them halfway through, it hurts a lot. Emblems can be used in a ton of ways, and each one is very different from the others. Corrin gets terrain manipulation, Sigurd gives you classic horse movement back, and he can skewer enemies who are in a row. Lucina makes every unit she's on do team attacks and can buff nearby party members. Marth lets you attack 3 times. Byleth as a 4-way dance, etc. Each one also acts as a stat backpack, so if you need certain stats shored up, that's a super easy way to do it. Take my Alfred. I made him a bow knight, but he still had speed troubles, so I equipped him with Lyn, who not only sped him up, he now had access to a map-wide nuke. Mauvier and Hortensia already have great movement for their healing, but give them Micaiah and their healing range with physics staffs is ridiculous, even before using the full screen heal Micaiah comes with. Leaf seems pretty bad at first, and he can be, but give him to a unit that he complements like a Great Knight or a Wyvern Rider, and with the right skills, he becomes a fantastic emblem with a huge nuke of an emblem attack with the right skills equipped. I love engage attacks as well. They aren't all crazy, but the ones that are insane. I think my personal favorite besides Byleth's 4-way dance is Celica's Warp Ragnarok. Early on, it's a free warp and kill, and though later on its damage is a bit worse, on a unit without insane movement like Anna, it makes her an incredibly mobile nuke that can go from far away from enemies to the front lines with no trouble. I would argue that engaging with emblems is the most powerful thing in the entire series. I'd argue it's stronger than capturing, stronger than pair up, stronger than bonus experience gorging, all of it. But at the same time, the game manages to be a challenging player phase focused game, especially on higher difficulties. And the reason for that is that emblems give you power, but this is also the only game I can think of that knows its mechanic is broken and limits you on it. Emblem rings throughout the game are pretty rare. Before around chapter 18, without DLC, you'll be limited to around 6 at a time. You can get weaker rings through gacha, but I didn't get any this playthrough, so I don't really care. Now, the game doesn't give you a ton of units per map, but even then, most units won't have crazy powers to play with at all times with the rings. This aids in each emblem's versatility, as because they don't all tend to focus on just raw power, and instead focus on things like support, offense, or defense, they'll be on very diverse types of units, making it not just a game of 6 OP units getting every ring. Yes, Celine does really well with Celica's ring, but maybe I want to give it to Anna, as Anna needs the extra power as she slowly levels up as a mage. Choices like this matter a lot, and they're very common. This is along with the fact that the most powerful thing emblems can do is engage. These will stack multiple exclusive skills, along with very powerful weapons and the previously mentioned attacks. However, they only last for 3 turns and can only engage attack once, and while you can recharge your emblem, not every unit with an emblem will get a chance to do that most of the time. This encourages smart play and smart uses, as you don't want to waste it, but you also don't want to just ignore it and save it for too long, because then the unit and the emblem won't bond and they won't get new weapons, abilities, or skills. It is a fantastic system, bolstered by the skills you can get from each emblem, which now I'm going to get into because I am still not done. Each emblem, depending on bond rank, has skills that can be used both passively with the emblem equipped or purchased with points gained from using emblems. This is where most skills are acquired, although unlike a lot of other Fire Emblems, this game actually tries to balance itself with all of these skills. First off, a lot of the best skills are expensive, so you can usually only get one at a time. Second, each character character only gets 2, so that limits your build, and if you're like me and give everyone Canter, that's even more limiting. However, it makes it much more fun and easy to grasp. You don't need to grind up classes or emblems because you'll naturally get the skill points necessary for what you want. Then it's just a matter of time of going to the arena and upping your bond, and bada bing. It's not a complete chore, and even if you do want to grind, the option is always there. Although, honestly, I usually play this game very linearly without doing grinding maps, as it's actually a lot more fun that way and keeps the challenge more consistent. I feel like this could have been a linear Fire Emblem game, but had to have grinding to match the previous games. But designing skill sets is incredibly fun, as you can do things like 100% crit builds, ridiculously powerful mages, or just round out weaknesses, like adding more avoid to a unit who's not dodging enough. This, along with the blacksmith being back, and also pretty balanced, means that every unit is going to be completely special and completely optimized in your own way. Oh, speaking of optional things, there's also the Somnio. It's where you do the things like equipping skills that I mentioned earlier. It's basically a less intrusive monastery from Three Houses. You can do mini games, buy stuff, pet your dog thing, and spend time with your different army members. Side note, I love that everyone gets casual clothes. I think that's adorable. It's not really something I personally spend a lot of time in outside of optimizing different units, but I'm sure it has its fans. And hey, as someone who gets sick of the monastery real quick, this being so minor and optional is a godsend. The last thing I want to mention from a strictly gameplay sense is the gameplay and story cohesion I mentioned earlier. In the story, emblems are a big fucking deal, and in gameplay you feel that. You feel really powerful the more rings you get, and in one of the best chapters in FE history, it takes it all away. In chapter 11, you're trying to escape with no ring, and most of all, no time crystal. Modern Fire Emblem games since Echoes have always let you time travel to adjust for your mistakes, but in this mission, when you're already super vulnerable, you lose that. Not only that, but a ton of enemies have emblems now and can use engage attacks and passives to do heavy damage. I played on normal for footage, but cranked that difficulty up to hard or maddening, and it is one of the most intense maps you will ever play. Then when the game later has Allier as a corrupted zombie, you can engage with any of the emblem, meaning you can only get their basic passives but not engage attacks or sync skills. However, it still goes from that powerless feeling of chapter 11 to a triumphant feeling when you get the rings back, as they are substantial buffs, and after the chapter, you not only get all of the rings back, but an extra emblem in Allier along with that. Cohesion like this rarely happens in Fire Emblem games. The last game I can remember doing it this well was Radiant Dawn, so it's really cool to have something like this here. And despite the fact that I've never thought the story here was very special, this improves it tenfold because I know if something important happens in the story, I'm gonna feel it in the next map. The music is also great. Go listen to the whole soundtrack. I've realized lately that I'm very bad at describing what makes music good, so I'm just going to say it's been in the background the whole video, and if you don't like it, you definitely don't have a soul. But before we close out, I want to touch on one more thing that I brought up a couple times, the comparison with Three Houses. Three Houses is a great game. It did a lot for the series. I liked what it changed and what it evolved, and I totally get why it's the most popular game in the series with the most popular story. But I'm gonna be real with you. I kind of hate comparing these two games together. Three Houses is an evolution and change up, while Engage is a celebration of the series while refining what came before it and being almost entirely gameplay focused. Both can exist and both can be good. In fact, they both are. But I'll be real, I think the issue is that a lot of Three Houses fans haven't played other Fire Emblem games. Hell, I know plenty that think Three Houses is the only good one, but I don't think that's even a conversation worth having. I love Fire Emblem. I can recognize both the good and the bad, and it's because of previous experiences that the refinements here are so impactful to me. Hell, I feel like even if you don't have a history with the series like I do, as a tactics RPG, this game is excellent. And Three Houses frustrates me so much because I feel like a lot of people who played it didn't play it for its gameplay. Therefore, all Fire Emblems need to be seen through that light. It discounts what makes Engage so fantastic, and if you take anything from this video, it's that people that like Three Houses have horrible taste and should be ostracized from the public. Oh, okay, I'm joking, but I'm not. But it's just a goof, guys, but I'm serious. But I'm just being silly, but fuck you. Holy shit, this video is way too long for my standards. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting for it. I just have a lot to say about this game. And hell, I could still probably go on about fun unit builds that I like or the DLC, but I'm gonna stop here. Engage is a fantastic game. Its story leaves some to be desired, but hey, my other favorite game in the series has the absolute worst story, so I guess that wasn't gonna matter anyways. It's a game I didn't expect anything out of, but what I got was a game that truly stunned me and that I really cherish. It's already become one of my most replayed Fire Emblem games, and give it another year, I don't doubt it will be. But for now, I love this game, and I hope I've at least kind of explained why its gameplay is so special and stands out so much to me. And hey, if you still don't like it, go fuck yourself. I'm never coming back.